Mr Speaker, I want to make two preliminary statements, and they are these. I reject the assertion that disagreeing with the government means that we are not treating this matter seriously. We are treating this matter seriously. And secondly, I reject the assertion that advocating for my constituents is playing politics. In fact, I resent that suggestion, as do my constituents who are frustrated by the fact that their MP is treated with such disregard when advocating on their behalf. Mr Speaker, I want to reflect on a couple of elements of what occurred yesterday with submissions on the bill. There was some criticism of the lack of notice and the failure of the government to provide access to the draft legislation. And I believe that that criticism has great merit, but people came to the table with goodwill. I am going to comment, though, on the Christchurch City Council submission. I was disappointed that the Mayor and the Chief Executive of the largest council affected by this legislation chose not to change other commitments that they had in the 4.5 hours that we had available. They had the choice of any time within that 4.5 hours that they could have come, that they did not choose to rearrange their other commitments in order to come to the Select Committee. Instead, they sent the Deputy Mayor and an in-house counsel who was actually quite a good person to have there, and they could have brought him anyway, who was actually in the unique position of having seen the bill about a week before the legislation was introduced. The Chief Executive had been allowed to show it to one member of staff, and he was that lucky member of staff. His contribution was very valuable as a result, and I want to place that on record. And I also want to place on record how valuable the contributions were from the individual councillors who came to plead for community engagement to be at the heart of the process of Canterbury's recovery. Chrissy Williams, Yanni Johansson, Helen Broughton and Glenn Livingston. And I want to say to all four of them, well done. You were doing what your constituents elected you to do, represent their interests in the best possible way that you could, under very trying, difficult circumstances, recognising the fact that not one of those councillors had seen the legislation other than on the website the day before. Mr Speaker, to read in the press this morning that the council had no idea of what they had done wrong after the first earthquake beggars belief, which is why the Chief Executive should have fronted the Select Committee yesterday. And I will be tabling 4 pieces of correspondence. In fact, I'll be tabling a number of pieces of correspondence over the next few hours. But in the second reading, I will be tabling 4 letters. The letter of the 4th of February that I wrote to Tony Marriott, Chief Executive of the Christchurch City Council, and copied to every single one of those councillors that sit around that table. And I want to just cover quickly what I covered off in that letter. The first item was recovery planning, highlighting the fact that, as you are aware, local authorities have a leadership role under the Civil Defence and Emergency Management regime with respect to the recovery effort. I understand that in the case of this event, the CCC has had to wait to see what response the government would give to EQC's recommendations on the Stage 2 report. But they did nothing before that, and they did nothing after that. And I went through how it was really important that the council should use the template for a recovery action plan on the CDM website if they didn't know how to do it themselves, and how our mutual constituents would gain a sense of what is planned and who will be accountable for meeting milestones if they adopted that simple process. I then went on to say that I was aware of an email that he had sent councillors where he said that the council was participating in the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Commission task groups that have been formed, as if it absolved the council of the responsibility to develop a recovery action plan for the city. The other affected councillors, and they are Waimakariri and Selwyn, haven't adopted that attitude and are getting on with the job. I then went on to say I have had an email from a constituent this morning asking why Kaiapoi is proceeding first. I will be replying that the Waimakariri District Council is doing an excellent job of recovery planning. You have said that the Christchurch City Council is treating the recovery as business as usual, with the exception that you've geared up to provide both the infrastructure rebuild and resource and building consent extra demand. If the City Council thinks that this is your sole role and that recovery can be treated as business as usual, then you've read none of the literature, you have not considered recovery best practice, nor have you looked at how other local authorities have dealt with disasters. And I use the example of Tauranga post the landslip, and actually the fact that Terry Wynyard, who was locally engaged with EQC, could have been available to lead that effort. He had led the effort in Tauranga and was available in Christchurch to talk to them. So I've actually done what I said that I would do. I've worked behind the scenes to give the council all of the information that it needs. I then went on to talk about the fact that they'd made a number of decisions that were predicated on the wrong information and felt that they should engage with EQC and the insurers in a meaningful way so that we could get on with the rebuild part after the first earthquake. I talked about their rates rebate policy missing the mark. I talked about Variation 48 becoming operative on the 31st of January and all of the concerns. I raised several questions about how Section 72 of the Building Act would be applied. I have done my job as a local representative of the people of Christchurch East, and I resent the fact that the Christchurch City Council, through its mayor, then went public to say that we were playing politics or making political capital out of the situation. So I wrote to him. I wrote to him on the 7th of February 2001, and I said that I decided not to be offended by your statements about some city MPs trying to make political capital out of the situation, because I am aware that you too have been stressed by the earthquake, coupled with the enormity of the task that the city must confront. I then went on to explain why the council had missed the boat in terms of its obligations in terms of recovery. And what it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, is this, is that the fact that the response effort of everyone was absolutely brilliant. It was textbook. It was fantastic. Nobody could criticise the response in the wake of either earthquake. But the response, being so brilliant, has masked the fact that the Christchurch City Council has completely failed the ratepayers of its constituency by not doing recovery at all. They didn't even start the recovery process after the first earthquake, and we have lost valuable time as a result. The other two letters that I am going to table are the letters that I wrote, the letter that I wrote to the Honourable Jerry Brownlee on the 27th of September last year, where I said, and this is how I concluded the letter, and I reference it in the letter to the Mayor, I said, thank you for what you are doing to lead the recovery effort. It is a major challenge, and I remain committed to assisting you in any way I can. And he wrote back to me on Christmas Eve, and he said to me that my comments about how we could have community consultation and communication were well made, and he would refer those comments through to the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Commission. I have done everything I can to work behind the scenes to look after the interests of my constituents. Mr. Speaker, the Minister talks about the people living in damaged houses on damaged streets with limited services, uncertain of the future of the property. Mr. Speaker, he's describing my neighbours. And the only reason I don't include myself in that description is because I have some of the resilience factors that some of my neighbours do not. I am mortgage-free. I have a good, uninterrupted income. I have the ability to make choices that are not available to others. I can even sneak away for a quake break and pay for it myself. Mr. Speaker, he says that if we don't agree with this model, then we are imposing a delay on resolving the future of my neighbours, and I reject that. How the land report information is released to my constituents must be respectful and must allow for an opportunity to engage. That must be better than the handling of both the release of the Stage 1 and the Stage 2 report. Mr. Speaker, I repeat the offer that I've made to the Minister to continue to work with him, but I have to say, and I've said this in writing to the government, trust is diminished. Tolerance levels are much lower than they were after the first earthquake. But I will help because this is too important for politics, too important for us to get it wrong. Mr. Speaker, there is a need to balance speed and deliberation, but community participation actually promotes the focused, timely and expedited recovery that the government says in this bill they want, and that's why the community must be at the heart of the recovery. Oh, point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to table the letters that I referred to in my address.
Is there any objection to that course of action being taken? There appears to be none. Member may table. I call the Honourable